by saying that tonight's shiur is Le'ilu Nishmat Avi Morido Ber Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Mimorti Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and tonight's shiur is also Le'ilu Nishmat Chaya Bat Moshe Leib Vivian Skolnick. So Misham should have an aliyah. And also wish everybody a happy Hanukkah. And we're going to be talking about that parsha, which almost always is read on Hanukkah, which is parshat MiKaitz. As soon as my screen comes up, and we will be able to get my screen share working here, and away we go. So just to give everybody the I guess the background, basically the parsha of MiKaitz continues with the story of Yosaif, where he is brought before Paro after the chief butler informs Paro that there is this great dream interpreter sitting in prison who interpreted my dream, and he was right on the money with it. And after Paro has had this dream and cannot figure out any proper interpretation, he decides to call Yosaif. And so I wanted to focus on A, the dream, B, how Paro relates the dream to Yosaif, and see how Yosaif interprets the dream. And the question that the commentaries focus on, and I'd like us to focus on a little bit as we go through the text, is did Yosaif go above and beyond the request of Paro to interpret the dream and become Paro's advisor, or did he not? In other words, whatever Yosaif said in terms of suggestions to Paro, something that is derivable directly from the dream, or is it something that Yosaif saw an opportunity to perhaps give Paro a little bit of advice and took the opportunity? So that's what the Parshanim are trying to figure out. But before we can figure that out, we have to first go through the story of the dream and what happens with it. So the parsha, of course, begins with 2 years after the end of last year's parsha, MiKaitz Natayim Yamin. 2 years have passed since the end of last week's parsha. If you remember correctly, last week's parsha, we concluded with Yosaif having interpreted the dreams of the baker, the butler, telling one of them that they were going to be returned to their appointed task, the other that they were going to be hanged for, and that was exactly what happened. And even though Yosaif requested that the butler remember him, he totally forgot about Yosaif. And we are now 2 years later. Paro has a dream, and I'll just, again, we all, I think, are familiar with the dream about the 7 relatively large cows, beautiful looking cows that come out of the river, and then the 7 scrawny looking cows who eat them up, and the 7 sheaves, the same thing seems to happen. And then Paro awakens in the morning in verse 8. His heart is pounding, vatipaem rucho, like a palmon. His heart is pounding like a bell. And he calls all of the Chartumei Mitzrayim and Koch Achamel, all the wise men and the Chartumim. Again, it depends on whose interpretation you go, is either magicians, astrologers, or some type of cult, masters of a cult, let's say. And he asks them for the interpretation. And interestingly enough, even though it says Paro tells them his dream, it says Ve'ein potero tam lifaro. Nobody interpreted them to Paro. Rashi, by the way, which we're going to see in a minute, has an interesting take on this, why they couldn't come up with an interpretation, or what there was the problem with the interpretations they did come up with. And then after they've all failed, and Paro seems, I guess, was worried about what's going to happen here, this Saramashkim tells Paro about the Yosaif, that he doesn't call him by name. It's interesting. He tells him, Visham Itanu, they're in prison with us. When I was sitting in prison, there was a Nar Ivri. He was a young Jewish guy, one of them, not one of us. And he was an Eved L'Sar Tavachim. He was some servant there to the prison guy, and we told him our dreams. He interpreted them and did a good job. as he says. So Paro immediately calls Yosaif. Interestingly enough, it says Vayiritzu min habar. They literally rushed him from the pit. Vayiritzu from the word larut, to run. They raced him from the pit. Paro's needs immediate audience. Get going. Get the let out. Let's go. But interestingly enough, Yosef doesn't immediately head to Paro, even though they're rushing him. He stops by Galach. He trims his beard. He makes himself presentable. By Chalevsim Lotav, and he puts on. I guess he had on his prison clothing. He wants to put on some respectable clothing, and then he comes to Paro. So Paro again relates the dream to him, and now we're going to try to go through the nuances in the dream. Now, again, we've got 3 columns here. Far right is as the Torah records the dream. Middle column is how Paro relates the dream to Yosaif. And in the far left is Yosef's response to Paro and I've highlighted the words that appear directly in the dream and how they appear. So let's begin with the actual dream as it's recorded in the Torah. Firstly, right. Paro is dreaming, and at the beginning of the parsha is Paro cholein. Paro is having a dream. Vinei omeid al hayar. Now he is standing al hayar. Literally means he's standing on top of the river. Okay. When Paro tells Yosef about the dream, he says, "Hinei al sfat hayar." I wasn't standing on top of the river. I'm not a god. I can't fly, but I was standing on the river bank. Okay. But in this dream, he actually saw himself standing on the river. Okay. So again, interesting nuance that the commentaries focus on. And by the way, like many places in Tanakh where we have a story that is related in multiple versions, we have 2 completely digressing schools of thought among the Parshanim. One school of thought says that's the norm. When you relate something that you've seen, you're relating it from your perspective. There are going to be changes in the word. They're not necessarily significant. And then, of course, there's the school of thought that says every word is significant, because if it wasn't significant, Torah would have just said, Paro told Yosef his dream. It wouldn't have had to say the words that Paro used to relate the dream if they weren't significant. And we had the similar case with Eliezer, Avram's servant, when he goes to Rivka and the whole story gets repeated. Again, same thing. Is it just normal usage, or are there significances that we are to derive from the differences in text? So he's standing by the river somehow, either on the river, over the river. The naming hayar, behold, from the river, olot sheva parot, 7 cows come up from the river. Now, in the actual dream, they are described as yefot mar'eh uvriot basar. Literally meaning yefot mareh, they are beautiful to look at, and briot basar, very, very fleshy, nice, healthy flesh. Okay, briot from bari, being healthy, basar, of course, nice flesh, nice cows. You'd like to go, shecht them and have a nice barbecue. Now, when he tells him, he switches it slightly. He says briot basar v'yefot toar. That they were good-looking cows. I don't know, was Paro a connoisseur, but they were good-looking. Yefot Toar often goes with. We have Yosaif described as Yefat Toar, Yefei Toar, Yefei Mareh, both. But again, one refers to your general overall appearance. The other, I guess, appears to your personal characteristics. But again, related clearly. Now, what did the cows do about Tirana? They graze in the plant life, the grass that's growing on the side of presumably on the side of the river, because if they came up from the river, then presumably they exited the river. They're no longer in the river, and they are standing on the river bank eating grass. What do cows do? They eat grass. That's what they're supposed to do, right? Perfectly normal dream up till now. Nothing abnormal about this dream yet. Okay, now we get to the second verse of the dream. There are 7 other cows that follow them out of the river. Again, notice here it doesn't say specifically from the river, but since it is acharehem, following them, we can assume that they came from the same locale. In the dream, actually, it does say min hayor, but Paro doesn't mention min hayor in the dream, in the repetition of the dream. But in the pasuk, it does say min hayor, that they came from the river. Now here they're described as ra'ot. Again, he's got mar'eh. Again, the same mar'eh that we had at the beginning is there in the dream. 1 second, let me just make this green like it's supposed to be. And this Torah is supposed to be green. You can see the differences here. And they are, again, bad. Ra'ot clearly means road. Dalot, here that we have, the Paro describes them as dal. Dal is poverty stricken. They were very, I would translate that as emaciated. Ra'ot Toar, not good to look at. Ma'od, very much Paro adds. Now here again we have dakot or rakot basar, meaning lean of flesh. Dakot meaning poor of flesh. Rakot meaning lean of flesh or empty of flesh. And then Paro adds a very interesting thought. He says, "Lo ra'iti chahena b'chol eretz Mitzrayim l'roa." I've never seen such scrawny-looking cows. Okay, he adds that. Clearly, in the dream, you can't see what Paro is thinking or seeing. So that would make sense. The Paro would relate that because this is the impression he got as he's going through the dream. Clearly, he didn't say that in the dream, but he's telling Yosaif to give him an idea, an impression of just how bad these cows were. Now, of course, Vatochal no haparot haraot. Okay, so the last verse of the dream is that the evil, the bad cows, and notice again, they're rakot or dakot or whatever, ate Sheva Parot, they ate the Yefod HaMarav Abriot, they ate the healthy ones, and Paro awakened. But now Paro, when he's again relating the dream to Yosef, he has to again relate what happened after they ate them. He says, Vatavona el kirbena, v'lo noda kibo el kirbena. Even though the lean cows ate the fat cows, now you would think, okay, you eat a fat cow, you're going to put a little fat on, a little meat on. They didn't. V'lo noda kibo el kirbena. Even after they had swallowed them completely and entered into their midst, you couldn't tell they were there. Umare and Raka Shevat Filah. They looked just as scrawny as at the beginning. Now you walk. Okay. Now let's see what Yosaif does with this. Let's go to the second dream, and then we'll go back and see what Yosaif says about all of this. The second dream, again, Paro falls right back to sleep in the original thing. And here we have Vinei Sheva Shibolim. There are 7, not stalks, it's 7 I get branches, 7 what do you call it? A shiba. It's again, if you think of a stalk, it's one stalk because it's olot b'kanecha. There's one stalk of some type of grain. Presumably, it's either wheat or barley. Now, if you load your wheat and barley sheaves, you've got different, I don't know what you call them, branching off of each stalk. The grains themselves, or the kernels, is that the right word? Actually, kernels? I don't know. Whatever the word is. They were all coming up on one, it was 7 different barley or wheat, things growing on one stalk. And they were briot v'tovot. Again, perfectly normal, nice, healthy stalk of wheat or barley or whatever it is. Doesn't say what it was, just says shibolim. Whether, as I said, but it was one of those grains. Again, after that, there were 7 not good ones. Again, notice slight changes in words. Briot, leot. Again, were they healthy or were they full? Healthy looking or full? Snumot, they were parched. Or shnufot kadim, they were dried out by from the east wind that grew after them. Okay, now this is totally unexpected here. Hatovot or habriot or hamlayot, whatever they were, and Paro awakens. Now, we would expect the scrawny cows, having arrived on the river, finding that the healthy cows ate all the grass. That's how they were so healthy. They would need something to eat. Now, we wouldn't expect them to eat other cows if they weren't starving and had nothing else to eat. So the first dream, while it is a very strange dream, the fact that they ate the cows and didn't put on any weight, that's probably the strangest aspect. The fact that the cows would eat other cows, well, there was nothing else to eat. They had no choice. There was nothing else to eat. They couldn't just survive on the water from the river alone, so they had to eat something. So that one, while it's strange, isn't completely beyond the realm of possibility. The second one does seem completely beyond the realm of possibility, where we have stalks of grain eating other stalks of grain. I mean, it wasn't the Venus flytrap that was eating, another stalk of grain. This was some stalk of grain that ordinarily wouldn't, but it's eating another stalk of grain. So if we look at the dream itself, we have two seemingly different messages, but two very, very similar messages. Something healthy is growing, is doing fine. The first half of each dream is perfectly normal. We know that Egypt, the river floods over. You got nice, plentiful crops. You got nice, healthy cows eating all that beautiful grass growing along the bank of the river, and everything is fine. And in Egypt, you would never expect, as Pharaoh himself says, I've never seen such scrawny-looking cows in Egypt in my whole life. So to have such scrawny cows in Egypt, that doesn't make sense to him. And then to go even further, that when they eat the healthy cows, nothing happens. So we're starting to see that there's something here that these are obviously symbolizing. It's not just straightforward. So again, he tells Yosaif this dream. Yosaif virtually immediately has an answer. Of course, after he's already told him before he started even relating his dream, when he arrives at Paro, he's already told him, look, it's not me. I don't have any great, brilliant skill. If God provides me the clue to interpret your dream, I'll be okay. If he doesn't, well, I don't know what you're going to do. But it's up to God to be the interpreter of dreams, according to Yosaif. So Yosaif says to Paro right away, he says, oh, by the way, you thought it was two dreams? No, it's one single dream. It has two parts to it to make the point that we're talking about. Because as I said, if we looked only at the cows half, we would say, okay, it could be talking about things are going to be bad. There's going to be a plague among all the cows or something. That's a possibility. Whereas the fact that this now is affecting the grain seems to be something more added to this. And we're going to see from the Parshanim that are going to tell us how they think Yosaif arrived at this response. So Yosaif tells him it's one dream, but it's interesting. He doesn't say, I've got this great Asher Elokim oseh higid leFaro. So he's already started off, giving Pharaoh this bent that it's up to God to provide the interpretation. God's given you the dream, and he's showing you through this dream what's going to happen. Okay, so now Yosaif uses some of the language. He says the Sheva Parot Tovot, the 7 healthy cows, are Sheva Shanim Hema. They are 7 years. And the 7 good stalks are 7 years, but not 14 years. It's all the same 7 years. He reiterates it. Don't think that it's 7 and 7. It's going to be 14 years. No, it's 7 years. The dream is one. And later on, Yosaif is going to tell him why the dream got repeated. But for this time, he's telling him it's a single dream. These 7 stalks and 7 cows are both representing the same 7 years. Okay. Then he says the Sheva Parot Rakot Varot Halot Achreihem Sheva Shnim Hema, and the second set of 7 cows are another 7 years. They're not the same 7 years we just talked about. And the Sheva Shibolim, the 7 bad stalks, are, now he doesn't stay there 7. He says there's 7 years, but he says they're going to be what type of 7 years? He's immediately already interpreting the dream as saying you Sheva Shnei Ra'av. Those are going to be 7 years of famine. So the 7 bad things that happen at the end of the dream, he's interpreting and telling him first what they are. He doesn't say, oh, they're going to be 7 years of plenty. He starts by interpreting that there are going to be 7 years of famine, because that's the part of the dream that really is abnormal. Because the part of the dream that's normal is, 7 healthy cows, 7 healthy stalks, fine. The fact that we have 7 emaciated, That's the point of the dream, and that's the purpose of the dream, as Yosaif is going to tell Paro right away. Now here, and he continues, Hu hadavar, this is exactly what I said. What God is doing, Heroat Paro. He is now showing Paro through this dream what's going to happen. And what is going to happen? And I Yosef recapitulate. 7 years coming. First half of the dream, you're going to have 7 years. It's not going to be 7 ordinary years. It's going to be 7 special years, 7 powerful years of great plenty. Sava Gadol, not just 7 ordinary years of plenty, 7 years of Sava Gadol. But the Kamu Sheva Shnei Rav Achrehen, just like immediately following these 7 cows out of the river were 7 other cows, there are going to be 7 years of famine that are going to come immediately after them. And as a result, all the whole 7 years of plenty will be completely forgotten. The famine will overtake the entire land. Okay? There will be no memory left of the 7 years of plenty because of the famine. Just like the 7 years of plenty are not going to be 7 ordinary plentiful years, the 7 years of famine aren't going to be, or 7 ordinary famine years, they are going to be severe famine. And by the way, in verse 32, Yosaif, having finished interpreting the dream, now goes back just to add one little thing. He says, by the way, you know why you dreamed it twice? Again, notice he mentions, brings Hashem into this equation, that Hashem this is proper thing before Hashem, that he's shared this with you, but it's happening. It's going to happen virtually immediately. It's going to happen very quickly. Now, if we stopped here and we went back to the dream, we looked at what Yosaif said, we could find virtually everything that he said. We could find the 7 years of famine, of 7 years of plenty. They're great, because these cows weren't just ordinary healthy cows. They were super healthy cows, beautiful healthy cows. They weren't just 7 ordinary emaciated cows. They were 7 terrible cows. Same thing with the sheaves. So the fact that we have this super abundance followed by super famine is clearly in the dream. The fact that the other things that Yosef says, that it's going to be so severe that it's going to be forgotten, where does Yosef get that from? Does he get that from the dream, or is he just sort of commenting on the fact of what's going to happen? And the answer is yes, one or the other. Either he got it from in the dream, or he did.
Maybe because the cows ate the other cows and there was no record, there was no impression of it.
Okay, that's one opinion. One opinion says the fact that the fact that the cow, David suggested, the fact that we have the cows didn't change. The skinny cows didn't suddenly become healthier looking after they ate the healthy cows. They looked exactly the same. And there is no trace of the healthy cows after they've been eaten. And that's what that there will be no trace of the plenty because of the famine that follows. Great answer. Okay. So now we continue, but Yosef doesn't stop there. Okay. Yosef now continues with the next couple of verses. And now Paro should appoint a wise and discerning person, and appoint him to oversee the land of Egypt. Through his 34, Paro should order and appoint officers throughout the land, the Chimesh and Eretz Mitzrayim, and they should take a 5th of all of the land of Egypt, b'sheva shnei asava, throughout the 7 years of plenty. 1/5 should be taken and set aside. The yikbitzu, and they should gather together. It was these officers who will be in charge, led by this wise man who's at the top of this hierarchical pyramid of food collection. They should collect all of the food of these 7 years of plenty that are they're coming right now. They're starting immediately. The yitzperu bar tachat yad paro, and they should gather up provisions underneath the hand of Paro. Ochel barim, there should be food in all of the cities, Vishamaro, and it should be preserved. And this food that we're setting aside will be set aside in the land for the 7 years of famine, which you're going to follow in the land of Egypt, so that the land should not be cut off during the famine. So the question the Parshanim are trying to understand is these last 4 psukim. Has Yosaif turned from dream interpreter into Paro's chief advisor, or is this all part of the dream interpretation? And the answer is yes. It's either or. Okay, so we're going to go through, and now we're going to start, of course, as we usually do with Rashi. First, before I get to this, I just wanted to do a couple of comments that Rashi makes that are just so poignant that I felt I had to share them. First is on the fact that in the dream themselves, the cows are described as Yefot Mar'eh, beautiful of appearance. They appear beautiful. And Rashi says that this, by the way, is Siman Hulis Meas Sova, that you can see from this that there's plenty. Why? What happens during years of plenty? Shabriot Nirot Yofot Zulazu. When everybody has everything they need, everybody is happy, everybody thinks everybody is beautiful. Nobody is, oh, he's got something I don't have and I want it. Halavai this Rashi were true. Halavai this Rashi were true, but I think Rashi was writing this before Madison Avenue, okay? Rashi never experienced Madison Avenue that says, you gotta have not only everything you have, but everything everybody else has. Back once upon a time, people were happy when they saw everybody, there was plenty of food, everybody was happy, nobody was fetching about what other people had. Halavai, we had a world where this was true, but in Rashi's world, it was true. Okay, so what? Well, he writes it. No, did Rashi ever have a time when there was Sova in his whole life? I don't know. That's a whole different question. Remember, Rashi lives in a very challenging period. He's living through the Crusades, okay, among other anti-Semitic acts that are happening in his life. He didn't have it easy. He spent a lot of his life wandering from point to point, or leaving his homeland, going to one place, leaving his yeshiva, going back home. Primarily not because he had expired his time had expired, but because he was usually running from something. So, but Rashi's perspective, it's a nice perspective to have, that certainly during years of plenty, people are less likely to be that grasping and greedy and jealous of other people. When you have your basic needs met, a lot more likely that you'll be at peace with the rest of the world than when you're not having your needs met and there's a famine going on and everybody's scrounging for that one thing to eat. Okay. Now Rashi. Okay. Now that was the only one that really didn't. Although again, it's Rashi is implying that the way Yosaif was able to figure out that the 7 good cows referred to as 7 years of plenty was because they were Yefot Mareh. They were beautiful to look at. And again, he's using this guiding point as saying that was Yosaif, one of Yosaif's keys to understanding the dream, was the fact that they were Yefot Mareh, that they were beautiful to look at. So that people looked at each other, or people looked at the world with the glass half full perspective rather than the glass half empty perspective. Okay. Now again, the cows ate the other cows. And now Rashi says Vatochalna, this is a siman, kol simchat hasova nishkachat b'mei ha'ra'av. The fact that they ate up. So again, there was no trace left of the fat cows. Is a siman. Rashi says this alludes to the fact that all of the joy of the 7 years of plenty would be forgotten once the famine started. Once the famine started, it was as if the years of plenty were never there. Okay, and that's what them eating them and totally swallowing them and not changing them symbolizes. Okay, again, we said nobody could provide an interpretation to Paro. Rashi says, no. Don't think that they didn't come up with interpretations. Potrim hayuam. They had all sorts of different interpretations. Avalo leparo. They did not interpret them as though it was Paro who had this dream. Shelo haya kolan nichnas bi'aznav. The words of the dream interpreters did not enter his ears. In other words, he did not accept any of the interpretations. He didn't feel right. He didn't feel can't be the right interpretation. Rashi gives one example. You're going to have 7 daughters and you're going to bury them all. And it didn't make sense to Paro. Okay. By the way, Sifsei Chachamim tries to understand why didn't it make sense to Paro. Okay. As Yosaif when Yosaif told him that it relates to this famine and this plenty, suddenly he felt at ease. He felt comfortable with that interpretation. Lefisha Amar, because now he understood. This is why God showed him this dream. In order that he could affect change if in the country to stave off the starvation during the famine. In other words, Paro felt that the reason this dream was given to him was that he had to take some action. He had no idea what the action was and how and what the 7 emaciated cows and emaciated stalks represented, but he knew he had to take some action to alleviate their swallowing up the 7 good ones. And so that's when Yosaif tells him this is what's going on. There's something you can do about it. He feels very comfortable with it. So if we look at where Yosaif tells him to set the food aside, at least Chacham's perspective, Rashi, is that Rashi is saying that Yosaif is deriving that from the dream itself. In other words, that the purpose of the dream, and if you're a dream interpreter, you have to be interpreting it with an eye to what is the action behind the rash. In other words, what is the reason why he's had this dream and what action is it supposed to lead to? So from Sifsei Chachamim's perspective, that's the point of the dream and the point of interpreting the dream, not giving Paro advice, but telling Paro that the purpose of the dream is you've got to do something about it. And that very much made sense to Paro, is what Sifsei Chachamim wants to say. And he goes and adds one more thing. That when a king has a dream, it's not a private dream. It's the dream the king is having as a public figure, as representing the state. And therefore, it has to be something that pertains to the state. So say you were going to have 7 daughters and they were going to, die. That didn't make sense to him because it spoke to Paro the individual, not Paro the sovereign, the monarch, who is there in the dream, presumably representing the country. So that's Sifsei Chachamim's take, at least of Rashi's interpretation of that part of why the interpreters weren't able to get the right interpretation, because they were looking at Paro as, okay, some guy came into my shop, give me a dream interpretation. Fine, you want a dream interpretation? Here. Dream interpretation, time it doesn't, give you whatever you want. But they didn't get the fact that it was not an individual, it was Paro coming to them with a dream. Although one would have thought, being that they were his advisors, they would have understood that. Obviously, we can give all sorts of reasons, like the one Medrash wants to say, well, they should have been able to figure this out. It was pretty much there, grain, cows, eating food, should have had something relation to food. In 2020 hindsight, once Yosaif said that, it's obvious. But again, the Medrash says that Hashem hid the interpretation, made them come up with not being able to see the real interpretation, in order that, because this was for Yosaif to begin the next stage of his life, which was ultimately going to bring Am Yisrael down to Egypt. And that's remember, if we think about the whole story, yes, there's what's happening with Yosef, there's what's happening with the brothers, but there's also Hashem trying to set in motion the fact that we're going to go through this exile in Egypt that he already told Avram about. That's a critical component of Jewish nationhood, of the founding of the Jewish nation, is that enslavement in Egypt. And so we're sort of, instead of being kidnapped and captured and brought down and changed, Hashem is sort of making it a little more palatable how we get to Egypt. Okay. Now Rashi goes further, v'nishkach kol hasava, that all of the plenty will be forgotten. Who be thrown habiliyah, as David wants to suggest. That's the swallowing, the fact that the healthy cows are swallowed and disappear without a trace. That's that's the sava being forgotten. The lo yivada hasava. There's two things. Firstly, it will be forgotten, but not only will it be forgotten, it will be as if it never happened. And Rashi says that is Yosaif explaining what it means. Lo noda kibo el kirbena. That the fact that the skinny cow, emaciated cow, stayed emaciated, that is to say that not only will we forget the famine, but it's as if it never happened. And that's so Rashi is saying that the beginning half is basically explaining the dream. The second half is at least according to Yosaif's perspective, Rashi is explaining Yosaif explaining why you had this dream, and that is a critical, at least according to Yosaif's perspective, Rashi is a critical component of the dream, a critical job of the dream interpreter to point the dreamer in the direction of what he has to do as a result of the dream. Okay, so that's one perspective. Now, of course, we have other perspectives, because if we didn't have other perspectives, we wouldn't have Torah, right? With all these different perspectives. So we come to Ramban. Okay. Now, firstly, in the beginning, again, it says the cows ate, the 7 cows ate the other 7 cows. Al dati. Now, Ramban says, my opinion, hu siman sheyochlu shnei hara'av et shnot hasova. Very interesting. He says the fact that the cows, the skinny cows, having nothing to eat the fat cows, is Yosaif's cue. From there, Yosaif is deriving that we have to use the food of the healthy years to sustain us in the bad years. Umizeh, and from here, Gamad Yosef Lomar Leparo, that's how Yosef goes and tells Paro that you should have to gather up all of the year of food or the excess food of the good years, so that the food should be available for the famine. Not giving him unsolicited advice, not giving him the direction he's supposed to follow because of the dream, telling you that's what the dream was telling you. By the fact that the skinny cows, the emaciated cows, eat the fat cows, that says that, from the 7 years, we're going to have the food to survive the 7 years of famine. That's part and parcel of the interpretation of the dream, according to Ramban. It's not giving unsolicited advice. It's not going off on a limb and saying, hey, I think this is what God wanted you to do about it. No, it's part of the dream interpretation. Because he saw in both cases, both the cows and the sheaves, that it's not that they cut down the good sheaves and trampled them. It's they swallowed them, they ate them, they sustained themselves from them. The Einenu Eitzah, it cannot be Yosef giving unsolicited advice to Paro. Why? Did he suddenly, because he was taken out of prison, become the king's advisor? This is part and parcel of the interpretation of the dream. And here, this verse is where, at least according to Ramban, is where he gets it from. Now, continues, that Yosef tells him. This is the pitaron. This is, again, it's not advice, or it's not that he's telling him something. It's, again, this is the interpretation of v'lo noda ki bo el kirbenu umarei and ra. Ki rosh lo hayu b'achilatan briot v'tovot. The fact that he saw after, that Yosef realizes that Paro sees after they've eaten the good cows, that nothing changes, that means that we've forgotten all about the good years. We don't know about them. It's as if they never existed. However, they, through their food that they produced, the excess food that they produced, they were able to survive. If they hadn't eaten the 7 healthy cows, they would have been so emaciated they would have died. So that from there, Yosef is deriving, as part of the interpretation of the dream, that we have to set aside food during the years of plenty to sustain ourselves during the famine. Below Kedivrei Rashi, not according to Rashi, who says V'nishkach kol hasava hi pitron habliya. That is the explanation of the swallowing. Okay. Now, Ramban addresses one other issue. Remember at the beginning, we talked about how Yosaif tells Paro there are 7 years coming, and then he says there are going to be 7 years of famine. Then in the recap, he says, oh, by the way, the first 7 years are going to be 7 years of plenty. Why does he begin by announcing the famine before he announces the 7 years of plenty? That's what Ramban is going to address here. He says, the reason, very simply, that Yosef tells him about the famine, because the fact that Egypt's going to have plenty, that's the norm. That's no big deal. He's pitaron haraot. So he had to first explain the emaciated cows. As Paro said, I've never seen such emaciated cows. So Yosef immediately jumps into the interpretation of those to put Paro at ease that this is what they're talking about. Not only is this the part that's strange about the dream, but it's also the purpose of the dream. Because Hashem mercifully shows Paro through this dream about this famine in order that everybody will survive the famine. And this is the other reason. The reason why the pasuk says, later on it says, after the end of when the Torah describes, it says the 7 years of plenty passed by, and then it says the 7 years of famine start, like Yosef said. Like Yosef. Yosef also said about the 7 years of plenty. Why don't we say it like Yosef told about the 7 years of plenty? No, because the fact that Yosef said there were going to be 7 years of plenty, anybody could have said there are going to be 7 years of plenty. I don't need a dream interpreter tell me there are going to be 7 years of plenty in Egypt. The fact is, you couldn't really tell whether Yosef's interpretation was a good interpretation until we got to the 7 years of famine, because that's the gist of the interpretation. Even though, yes, there is 7 years of plenty that precede it, but the fact is, the real purpose is as Ramban says, the purpose of the dream and the fact the astonishing thing about the dream is that there are going to be 7 years of famine. All right, so Ramban continues that you have Paro, Yosef advises Paro or tells Paro, Yereh Paro ish navon b'chacham, because that is part of the dream interpretation that we have to set aside the food. Now, why does he need an ish navon, a wise and a chacham, a wise and a navon understanding person? He says you have to have two characteristics. You have to have somebody appointed who has these two characteristics. Why? And he has to have people working under him who will do the physical collection of the food. He is going to be the superintendent and the man that's in charge of it all. Obviously, he's not going to go single-handedly through the whole land of Egypt to collect all the food. He's got to have a bureaucracy. He's got to have a team to get that all done. But why do we need these two characteristics in the person heading that department? Navon, number one, he has to be discerning. He has to be able to properly ration the supplies once we get to the years of famine. So he has to have collected an appropriate amount of food, and he has to be able to ration it properly so that it will last through the 7 years. But he also has to make sure he provides enough for people to survive. He doesn't want people to starve. He doesn't want people to overindulge so that we squander all the supplies because we know we're going to need them for 7 years. But by the way, once he's given the Egyptians enough, after that, once he's given, in other words, rather than letting the Egyptians during the famine splurge, he should set some aside to be sold to other countries during the famine, so that he can enrich Pharaoh's coffers. So that's why he has to be wise and discerning. He also has to be able to fend people off with a stick so that they don't start demanding more food. What do you mean? We're starving. No, you're not starving. I gave you enough. That's why he has to be wise, make sure he's giving them enough. The chacham. Now, what does he need wisdom for? Sheyeda lekayemat for shlochekah. He has to be a master scientist who knows how to ensure the food will not spoil. Very simple. He has to find natural preservatives that will maintain the crops that are, once they're cut and stored, so that they will survive. Okay, and then he goes through a whole bunch of examples. And now he adds very simply, Rambam wants to. By the way, Yosaif added this so that they select him. Ki hachacham einav berosha, because the wise man is always looking out and seeing what possibilities. In other words, he saw an opportunity, he grabbed it. He wasn't giving advice, but he was sort of backhandedly suggesting, yeah, I know somebody who's got those characteristics, but those are the characteristics you need. Again, same thing we said. He's saying again, the fact that we set the food aside is part of the dream interpretation. Why? Just like Ashalometu Aparot the Chishehem. Even though the cows, the second set of cows were emaciated, they didn't die because they survived by eating the other cows. So too, we have to make sure that we set aside enough food to survive, for the people to survive. Okay, that's Ramban. As I said, Rashi seems to imply that Yosef went over and above and beyond his in job as an interpreter and gave advice. Ramban saying no, all of this advice that he's giving is really part and parcel of the interpretation. Yes, he may have colored it a little bit to accentuate how well suited he was for the job, but it was clearly all part and parcel of the interpretation. Okay. Let's put. I'm going to just skip through most of the Clay card. Just go to the end here. He goes through a whole lot of interesting stuff here. We're going to go to the end where he basically goes back to this whole. Okay, here we go. What he says at the end, Paro should appoint somebody. He's lashon viata. He adds the word viata, and now Paro has to do this right away. You can't wait till you can't have you can't send out a requisition and say, hey, we're looking for somebody with these qualifications. We're gonna, go through interviews and a vetting process over the next couple of months. Bauer says now. You have to do this right away. Immediately, we need to appoint somebody because it's starting right away and you don't want to waste any time. Ramban, what the Ramban asked, how the Yoetz and Son Melech, wait, did the king appoint him as advisors? Nira Li appears to me, this that we need to appoint somebody to be in charge of food is also part of the interpretation. The reason that the other interpreters were not able to interpret the dream was because they didn't understand what the purpose of the dream was. Why was Hashem showing this dream to Paro? Therefore, therefore, to cement Paro's acceptance of the interpretation, that he explained why Hashem gave this dream specifically to Paro. That he would appoint somebody immediately to deal with the dream so that it would be a dream whose portent was taken and therefore the disaster would be averted. And that is exactly what this Chachamim says. Very, as I said, similar to Ramban, but also similar to Rashi. So even though it's part of the dream, it also seems to be a little bit beyond the interpretation of the dream. Okay. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh comes right out and says, no, I don't agree with Ramban. Tam Yosef Nasa Yoetz Lamelech. Why does Yosef decide to become the king's advisor? Where he only asked him to interpret the dream. Again, the reason is very similar to what we just said, but he says the purpose of the whole dream was in order for you to appoint this whole hierarchy to collect food. That's it. And that's why he stresses that point right away after he's told him the simple interpretation of the dream, that 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. He now adds and becomes the king's advisor by telling him, this is why you had the dream, this is what you got to do about it. And even though that wasn't what you called me here for, I'm telling you that. So again, very different way of looking at it. It seems that all of them are reaching pretty much the same conclusion, but the question is it really in the dream or is it not in the dream? And it makes a significant difference because if we think about it, and we think about this whole story, this whole chapter, we have to look at Yosaif as one of the Shvatim, is somebody we're supposed to be learning something from. So the question becomes that what is it we're trying to learn from Yosaif is how are we supposed to deal with the challenging situation of, we've been in prison for all these years. We now have an audience with the king, somebody who has the power and ability clearly to get us out of prison, no question about it. And how far are we supposed to go when we have that audience or when we have that opportunity with somebody who has the ability to get us out? Where do we go? And it goes back to the same question we had at the end of last parsha. Was Yosaif supposed to tell the butler to remember him, or was he supposed to just say, well, Hashem's going to take care of me and save me? And this is a question that we are faced with. How far are we supposed to say, okay, Hashem's going to take care of it? And how much is Hashem saying just, hey, I'll help you when you take care of it. Don't wait for me to do the whole thing. And this is true on an individual basis, and it's certainly true on a collective basis for Am Yisrael. Are we supposed to make Aliyah, build a state, and start bringing about Mashiach? Are we supposed to sit in Golah and wait for Mashiach to come on the donkey's on the back of a donkey, and then we'll all join him? Very, very important questions, because how do we learn? What are we supposed to be learning from Yosef? Okay, clearly, if we think of, we're always standing before the king. We always have an audience before the king anytime we want. And the king can bring any salvation we need. The question is, do we know how to approach the king properly to get that salvation, to achieve that? So, again, are we just interpreting the dream and sitting back and waiting for God to do the rest? Or are we interpreting the dream and going a step beyond and saying, okay, this is why Hashem sent us the dream. This is why Hashem put me here to do this and to start the ball rolling. And the commentaries, as I said, I've only brought a couple because I knew I was going to run out of time after that. But we see, and we can find all sorts of other, shades of this, but these are basically the two questions. Do we, when we are given the opportunity in front of somebody who has the opportunity to make this happen, to say, okay, here's what we need to do? Or do we just sit back and say, well, this is as far as we're going to go? And I hope and pray that Hashem will give us this, like Yosaif says, we need ish navon v'chacham, a wise and discerning and person to be able to give us the right answers to these questions in terms of how far are we supposed to be going as individuals, and certainly as collectively as Klal Yisrael, in terms of bringing about the future of Am Yisrael and the success of Am Yisrael. And when we get the right answers to that question, we have the right leaders leading us in the right directions, then we are sure that we will reach that final goal of bringing Mashiach b'meher v'yameinu. So thank you all. I open the floor to questions, comments, and feedback at this point. And nobody? Anybody? Go ahead.
I don't know if I misheard at the very, very beginning when Yosaif was remembered by someone as being someone who could interpret dreams and was brought out of the prison.
Yeah.
Did you say he was brought up from the pit?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you use the phrase he was brought up from the pit?
Yeah, the bar. I mean, the bar, prison, pit. Again, according to, I don't remember who uses the word interchangeably. Sohar, bar. These are all dungeons, probably is the better translation. But in Egypt,
he went from one pit to another, if you know what I mean.
Yes. See, it's interesting because the bar that the brothers threw him in was probably a water collection reservoir of some type.
But there was no water in it.
Okay. With no water in it because it was not the rainy season. Okay, very simply. It was the end of the summer or whatever time of year it was when they had used up all the water in it. That's why the Torah has to tell us because ordinarily the word bar in certain instances refers to a cistern that's dug to collect rainwater. So the fact that there was no water in it had to be stated so that we would know. Because if there had been water, it meant, well, gee, we threw Yosaif into this pool where he was going to drown. So that wouldn't have been any different than them taking a knife and killing him. So the fact that, again, remember, the brothers go through 3 stages. Let's throw him in the pit. No, let's kill him. Let's throw him in the pit, and then let's sell him. And if the pit had been full of water, let's say 3-5 meters of water because it was the rainy season and it just filled up, well, that wouldn't have been any different than killing him outright. So that's why it tells there was no pit. Now, in terms of the Egypt, the bar is used as the term to probably give us a better description of what the prison was, as it's saying that rather than being an above ground prison, it was probably a below ground prison, which makes a lot of sense. You dig a dungeon, you make nice smooth walls, and that's it. You put a grate on top and you throw food down through it. And that's not unknown in the ancient world what? Yes, yeah, you're lucky they throw down a few crumbs, yes. But that's a very simple and generally effective, prison, before they started worrying about building prisons out of bricks and mortar. So it was, in the ancient world, that was probably what most prisons were. They were a whole dug with a fence, a grate above it, and a guard sitting by the grate. So that's why it uses the term bar, I would suspect. Okay?
No,
Wait, I'm sorry. Go
I have
ahead.
a
Wait,
question.
Jackie, you have another question, Jackie? I'm sorry. Sorry, Rita.
No, I
Jackie?
said thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rita. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Here it seemed like Joseph was put in the position and he said, okay, I'm the person to help you. How do we know today who was the person to help us? The guy that
Oh, please. That's a great question. The problem is we have too many people who think they're the person who can help us, and we don't have, and the people who think they can help us are not really willing to step forward, perhaps because they realize that they're going to be either ridiculed or not paid attention to or what have you, because of the unfortunate times that we live in where, people who are in positions of authority are not necessarily the people you'd want to be there. So it's a great question. I wish I had a great answer for you, but the simple answer is that who wants to go into leadership roles today, given the propensity of the media to look to destroy anybody who is in any position of authority. You have to really have a pretty strong, ego or hide maybe to be able to withstand a lot of that. And unfortunately, many of the people who want to go into those positions aren't people who really are best suited for that. So I'll leave it at that.
thank you.
David's saying, well, in Joseph's case, because Joseph had the dream, so that's a good point. Joseph himself had these dreams, so he knew that so I guess he had been preparing all his life to be thrust into a position of leadership. So I guess, that's a good point. Yosaif sort of knew that somewhere along the line he was going to end up having a position of leadership, so perhaps he was more prepared for it. That's a good point. Thank you, David. Okay.
Right. Have a good week.
All right. Hanukkah Sameach to everyone. Take good care. Have a good rest of the week. And Bezhashem, we'll try again the next week.
Hanukkah
Laila
Sameach.
Tov.
Thank you.
And Hanukkah Sameach to everyone.
Chag Sameach.